Today's episode is brought to you by United Faith Leaders, the host of the Faith Leader Directory. Be found at unitedfaithleaders.com. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Coffee Pot Fellowship podcast. My name is Jay McNeil, and our guest today is the Rabbi Ari Moffic. Ari, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, Ari, thank you for being here. I'm going to tell folks a little bit about you, and then if it's okay with you, we're going to play a little snippet from your Eli talk as part of our introduction. Does that sound okay?
Great.
So we're going to hear more about what Cohere is, but Ari is the founder of Cohere. She was ordained in 2007 from Hebrew Union College. She has her undergraduate degree from Indiana University in Religious Studies, during which she got slightly obsessed with Buddhism, which I'd also love to hear more about. Mm-hmm. She then went on to Baltimore to complete a master's degree in Jewish education from Baltimore Hebrew University. She's been the Director of InterfaithFamily Chicago and spends her full-time rabbinate? How do you say that?
Rabbinate, good.
Rabbinate? It doesn't sound right to me. I need to keep using that word. Her full-time rabbinate focused on supporting interfaith couples and families who are exploring Jewish life. Her husband is also a Reformed rabbi, and they are proud parents of an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. She's open to mall walking or meeting for coffee and discussing how it is that someone from Boston now lives in Chicago, far, far from the ocean. That is all straight from her biography, because I wanted you to hear how she chose to describe herself. I feel like it does tell us something about the way she does her ministry. And it feels akin to United Faith Leaders and clergypreneur work that we do. So without further ado, I want to play that snippet from her Eli talk.
Synagogues can't have the monopoly on what it means to be affiliated and what constitutes Jewish community. Synagogue is a vehicle for community for so many people, but the model isn't working for the majority of American Jews. And so we're going to need new models and new ways to think about Jewish community, not as opposed to or against, but in addition to. And we can tell people, we can encourage people to call their friendship groups and the people they meet up with to do Jewish things with community, because that is the lens by which we understand Judaism.
And I think that that brings open-mindedness to what our faith can be that I'm not sure exists everywhere. As you talk about community, how important do you feel community is to faith tradition, to the Jewish tradition?
All right. Community is something that the Jewish world is really, it's very, very intrinsic to Judaism and very important to the Jewish world. In fact, community is pretty much a synonym for synagogue. So when, we say that you belong to a congregation or a synagogue, you would say that you have a Jewish community. And for people who don't belong anywhere, they would say maybe they're doing Judaism outside of community, in quotes. And so we really have a binary set up in Judaism of congregational affiliation, which means community, which means good, and unaffiliated, which has a negative connotation, which means private, which means bad.
Right. Something people probably tend to feel guilty about, right?
Right. And rabbis and Jewish leaders try to get everyone to be in community. And so if I work with a child, let's say, to mark having a bar or bat mitzvah ceremony, but that family never joins a congregation, people might say, oh, they had a private bar mitzvah, meaning not communal. Right. So we really struggle with this. And I think it's because Judaism is a communal religion civilization. We don't have a model of being, someone in solitary meditation on an island somewhere. That's just not a Jewish concept. So we are a people. We pray in a group that's called a minyan, and we you have to study with other people, and there are certain prayers you can't say unless you have at least 10 people. And so we are a communal people. And so it's very hard to wrap your head around doing Judaism or participating in Judaism unless you're with a lot of other people. And then that's usually done in a synagogue or in a congregation.
Well, thank you. And I want to invite folks to listen to the whole Eli talk. It's only about 10 minutes. And it is living on our show notes page. We did go ahead and embed it on the show notes page, so you can watch it there, or you can open it up in YouTube. But we'll put everything, as usual, on the show notes page. So all the links and things that we'll be talking about will be on that show notes page. And as usual, that'll be at coffeepotfellowship.com. And so let me jump into our story portion here and ask you, Ari, do you have a favorite story that you'd be willing to share, either one of your own or one that you've heard?
Sure. We have a kind of obscure Jewish holiday coming up at the end of January 30th and 31st. And it's a holiday called Tu B'Shvat, which means the 15th of the Hebrew month of Shvat. And it's a nature holiday. It's a holiday about trees, about the birthday of trees. And there's a whole mystical meal involving nuts and fruits and pouring different glasses of fruit of the vine, of grape juice or wine. It's a really interesting holiday. But there's a story that comes up about the holiday, and it's on my mind because it's almost Tu B'Shvat. And I think the story tells a little about why I'm doing the work I do. And the story is about a fascinating character named Honi, which is spelled Honi. And you can Google Honi, the circle maker. And he's just a really interesting guy who really bargains with God at a few different points. But this is a story that's told about him from the Talmud, from the section of rabbinic literature, rabbinic text. And the story goes that one day he was journeying on the road and he saw a man planting a carob tree. And he asked him, well, how long does it take for this kind of tree to bear fruit? And the man said, 70 years. And then Honi asked him, well, are you certain you're going to be alive for another 70 years? And the man said, well, I found already grown carob trees in the world, as my forefathers had planted those for me, so I plant these for my children. And Honi sat down to have a meal, and sleep overcame him. And as he slept, a rocky formation enclosed upon him, which hid him from sight, and he continued to sleep for 70 years. And when he woke up, he saw a man gathering fruit from a carob tree. And he asked him, are you the man who planted this tree? And the man said, no, I'm his grandson. And thereupon, Honi realized that he had slept for 70 years. And so I love that story because it's about planting the seeds for ourselves and also for future generations. And it's also about hope. And it's also about being willing to plant ideas that we care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great story. I can see why any tradition would not want to fail to tell that story, right? That's excellent. Thank you. How about, is there a story of biggest trial or blunder that you'd be willing to share?
You know, I thought about this question, and I think that for a lot of us, our life maybe takes twists and turns that we didn't ever imagine we'd be in that situation, and then you find yourself in that situation. And I can think of major things like going through a divorce, or which I went through, raising children with different special needs that I wouldn't have imagined, you know, I might have been dealing with. And you kind of can think to yourself, how did this happen? Like, how am I in this place? This isn't the narrative I would have imagined for myself. And those are trials that you dig deep and you find strength, and you get help, and you go through and you create a new normal, or you create, you know, what you write the story of how you want it to be. But I think that for my work as a rabbi, especially, one thing, I think the biggest trials for me are situations when I've been in meetings with other people, interactions with other human beings where we're trying to connect, and I feel for whatever reason, maybe I talked too much, or maybe I interrupted too much, or maybe I didn't listen well enough. or maybe I spoke badly of someone else and I wish I hadn't gossiped. And those things where I'm hard on myself with self-reflection and wish I had been a better version of myself or a better person. And so it's those smaller trials, because I spend so much time with other human beings, that I work on the most, and that kind of worry me the most.
So you think that those, I don't want to call them minor, but I feel like, they're minor, but they may be reoccurring. So you're saying those are the things that you feel like you're hardest on yourself about, or that persist?
And that I want, and that I think are the hardest trials to deal with, really, in some ways, because for clergy, we do sit at the computer and do administrative work, but mostly our work is with other people. And so on a very daily basis, I review how my day went, and I review what I said and how I acted. And so I have many opportunities to mess up. And so I think that the harder trials are watching our words and watching how we respond and react to other people.
It reminds me, sometimes I forget this, and I have to remind myself that I try to evaluate, and I learned this like all at once in college, just sort of observing the world around me. But I decided at one point to stop evaluating a day based on how smoothly it went, and rather on how I responded to the things that didn't go smoothly, right? Because your life just doesn't shape up exactly, and it's true of your days, one's days, I should say, right? They just don't go smoothly. But when I go to bed at night, I try to think about how did I respond to those things? And do I need to go back and apologize to somebody? Did I apologize to them in the moment? Was I able to express on my second or third effort what I failed in the first effort? So I hope there's more overlap there than it seems like right now. Well, thank you. All right. Now, how about, is there a story of a happiest ministry moment that you'd be willing to share?
Well, I love being a rabbi. It's been the most interesting, amazing way to spend these last 10 years. And so I've not been a pulpit rabbi, a congregational rabbi. And so I've done a few different things with my rabbinate. First, there's that word again, rabbinate. It's kind of like a rabbit. I've been the director of education at two different synagogues, which means I've run the religious school and the learning programs. And that's been very interesting to figure out what it is that we are teaching our children on Sundays for a couple of hours about religion and about faith and Judaism and community and lots of other things, and how it works and when it doesn't work. And I worked for a nonprofit called InterfaithFamily for 6 years in Chicago. And so for those 6 years, I just worked with interfaith couples, almost all Jewish Catholic couples, sometimes Jewish Protestant, Jewish Muslim, Jewish Hindu, Jewish secular atheist, but a lot of Jewish Catholic couples around getting married, having children. And that's become just the joy of my rabbinate, is working with interfaith couples. I was a religious studies major, so I love religion, and I've just enjoyed getting to know other clergy and figuring out how to navigate coming from two different backgrounds. And so I get to do a lot of weddings, and that certainly is a great joy to be able to be with a family. It's such a happy time, and to talk about how life is a series of days unless we pause occasionally and mark time. And this is just such a wonderful occasion to mark time with everyone around you who just adores you and supports you. And so that's been really wonderful. But I would say also, just like the earlier question about trials, that really for me, the best part about being a rabbi is when I'm sitting at a Starbucks with a couple, and they're probably drinking coffee and I might be drinking tea, and we just connect. And I feel that's God. I feel that we were meant to intersect in that moment of life. Maybe we'll know each other for a year. Maybe we'll be in each other's lives now for years to come. And that we have this sacred connection of trying to use religion to make our lives richer and more meaningful and better. And so that's really the joy of my rabbinate, is when you feel you connect, that you're really connecting with other people. And through this new project that I started in July called Cohere, I come to people's kitchens now and bring Judaism to them. So it's really deep joy to be able to be in intimate spaces with people and just have real human interactions around religion.
Having seen some of the pictures of the weddings that you've been involved in, I was sort of hoping that would come up, because that coming together and working those things out and figuring out, who God is to each of the people in the couple and how they're going to do family together, and is it something that they can work out, or is it not something that, do you not go forward with this marriage? Those right. Challenging questions need to be discussed, right? But so to see them coming together was really beautiful. And usually it's not so apparent. You can't see what people's faith traditions, sometimes there's indications, but to see the priest and the rabbi standing side by side conducting the wedding was very beautiful. And that was several situations. So that's really cool. And then to hear you talk about being in the coffee shop with folks, I can relate to too. I feel like you're a kindred spirit. And it makes me want to ask you, for me, whether it's an individual that I'm talking with or a couple, one of my most sacred and wonderful and honored moments to be with folks is when I find myself asking them, who is God to you, right? And is there a moment like that or a question like that you feel like reoccurs in those experiences with you?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. I wish that was a question that more Jews would feel comfortable talking about. It's really interesting. When a couple comes to me, the first thing they say is, Rabbi, we're not that religious, we're spiritual. Yeah. That's usually the first. Well, you want a rabbi though, right? Yeah. So then we talk about why do you not like the word religious? What is, why won't you say, why don't you say that word? And, you think of yourself as spiritual. So what does that mean? And
right. And why did you reach out to a religious leader if you think you want basically a secular service? And so there's that contradiction.
Yeah. And Judaism is cultural too. So right. I get it. I totally get it. But it's just parsing out, what our baggage with that word religion is. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for elaborating. I asked you to pull that apart for me. I really appreciate it. As we begin to wrap up, is there anything in particular you'd like to promote?
I just want to leave with the idea that we can break down some of the binaries perhaps that exist, where there's a traditional house of worship, a synagogue or a church or a mosque, and that can sometimes be the cornerstone of a community, but it's either that institution or kind of nothing. And whether we can be open to having other ways people can connect in fellowship and learning through social justice, and have that also be enough, for one thing, and not have it always be, it has to be, on the steps, paving the way toward joining the convention, or that it's a different, but that there have to be other equally good options for people to find connections. And so maybe we can see if we can break down some of those binaries.
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that Cohere is a good place for people to be in conversation with you about that and maybe be finding solutions, yes?
If you come to CohereChicago.com, I try to write about some of this stuff and raise some of these questions, and I'm always interested to get an email or phone call to talk more about these topics.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll go ahead and put that in the show notes with everything else. And I mentioned it once, but it's coffeepotfellowship.com. So feel free to check that out. And I wanted to ask you about one more thing that didn't come up. Can I ask you about before we go, the Open Dor Project?
Sure. The Open Dor Project has been a fantastic grant opportunity for me. They support 3 or 4 rabbis in a cohort, and I was lucky enough to be part of the first cohort, where they give enough money to really help pay your salary and make your venture financially viable so that you can start a new community or a new idea. So if you are a rabbi across any denomination and you have an idea for a new form of community or a new venture, definitely look up Open Dor, D-O-R Project.
Mm-hmm. And is Dor with just one O, is that a Jewish word?
Right, it means generation.
Okay. Yeah. I took Hebrew for a year and I didn't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that, and thanks for spending this time with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in, and thanks for living into who you are fully called to be. Today's episode was brought to you by United Faith Leaders, the host of the Faith Leader Directory, to be found at unitedfaithleaders.com.